Marlon Brando wasn't just a cinematic icon. He was also a father many times over. Over his lifetime, Brando had children with multiple women, accumulating a brood of at least 11 kids. Some were born within his 3 marriages, others were adopted or born out of wedlock. His family life was as dramatic as any of his films, marked by bitter custody battles, scandalous headlines, and deep personal loss. By the time Brando died in 2004, he left behind 11 children and dozens of grandchildren. In this video, we'll explore whatever happened to each of those children and how Brando's complicated legacy shaped their lives. From public trials to private pain, and even an eco-island resort, their stories are filled with emotional twists, surprising facts, and vivid details you won't forget. Number 11. Christian Brando. Christian Davey. Brando was Marlon's eldest son, born May 11, 1958, to Brando and his first wife, actress Anna Kashfi. As the number 1 son, Christian's life would prove tumultuous. He grew up amid a nasty custody feud between his parents, a battle so volatile that at one point, Christian's mother allegedly had him kidnapped by a group of hippies during a dispute, paying them $10,000 to hide the boy in a tent. This traumatic episode left Christian fearful. Friends say he began hoarding guns, terrified of being kidnapped again. Christian's youth was chaotic. Kashfi struggled with substance abuse, leading a judge to strip her custody due to her reliance on drugs and alcohol. Young Christian bounced between relatives, living with an aunt for years, until Marlon won custody in 1972 and sent him to boarding school. In later interviews, Christian recalled, "I grew up with an extremely violent mother. She drank, and we had a lot of problems." Despite Marlon's efforts to be a better father than his own had been, Christian often felt caught in dysfunctional family dynamics. In his 20s, Christian tried to act, often under the alias Gary Brown, but it was crime, not cinema, that etched his name in headlines. On May 16, 1990, a family tragedy unfolded. Christian shot and killed Dog Drawley, the boyfriend of his pregnant half-sister Cheyenne, in Marlon's Los Angeles home. That night, Cheyenne, 8 months pregnant, confided to Christian that Drawley had been abusive. A protective and reportedly intoxicated Christian confronted Drawley with a .45 pistol. He later claimed the gun went off by accident during a struggle, but police found no signs of a struggle, and Drawley died from a single shot to the head. The scandal was immense. Marlon Brando, hearing the gunfire in another room, rushed in and desperately tried to revive the victim. During Christian's trial, a devastated Marlon testified, "I think that perhaps I failed as a father. I'm certain that there were things that I could have done differently." It later emerged that Cheyenne had fabricated the abuse story. She admitted she lied about being hit, leaving Christian feeling betrayed. "I feel like a complete chump for believing her," he said. Christian ultimately pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter, avoiding a murder conviction. In 1991, he was sentenced to 10 years, though he served only about 5, gaining release in 1996. But freedom did not bring peace. He spiraled into substance abuse and further legal trouble. Arrested for DUIs and later pleading guilty to spousal abuse in 2005 for assaulting his wife, Deborah Presley, who, in a strange twist, claimed to be Elvis Presley's illegitimate daughter. Christian's dark trajectory culminated tragically. On January 26, 2008, he died from pneumonia complications at age 49. In his final days, he was in a coma, destitute and without health insurance. Even as he lay dying, family conflicts raged at his hospital bedside, factions of relatives arguing over his care and burial. It was a sorrowful end to a troubled life. Number 10. Mico Castaneda Brando. Mico Brando, born February 26, 1961, is Marlon's second son, the first of 2 children with his second wife, Mexican-American actress Moveda Castaneda. Unlike his older brother, Miko largely stayed out of scandal and found a unique path balancing celebrity and normalcy. As a young man, Miko did some acting. He had a small role in his father's film, Born Wild, but he soon stepped behind the scenes, working for pop superstar Michael Jackson. In fact, Michael Jackson was a close family friend. Marlon and Michael were pals, and Miko became part of Jackson's inner circle. For over 30 years, Miko was Michael Jackson's trusted employee and friend. He started as Jackson's bodyguard, and later, after Jackson's 2009 death, Miko stayed on with the Jackson estate, helping catalog the late singer's possessions. If you've ever seen footage of Neverland Ranch in the 80s or 90s, you might spot Miko in the background, quietly keeping watch. In interviews, Miko has described his father in glowing terms. Despite Brando's mercurial reputation, Miko remembers him as a playful dad. When we were around him, he wasn't Marlon Brando, the famous two-time Oscar winner. He was just dad. Miko told one reporter, recalling how they would wrestle and joke around. He says Brando made each of his kids feel number one, and happy, and cherished, loved. A stark contrast to the neglect some of his half-siblings felt. Perhaps because of this positive upbringing, Miko avoided the turmoil that beset others. He's lived a relatively low-profile life for someone with such a famous name, often appearing only to represent his father's legacy or to speak about Michael Jackson's memory. Today, Miko Brando is in his early 60s and reportedly a family man himself. He has children, including a daughter named Prudence. He has continued to honor his father's legacy in subtle ways, for example, helping to open the Brando, an eco-friendly luxury resort on Marlon's private Tahitian island. In 2014, a decade after Marlon's passing, Miko and some of his siblings transformed that island, Tetiaroa, into a resort, realizing their father's dream of preserving the atoll. It seems fitting that Miko, who enjoyed some of the most normal father-son moments with Marlon, would carry on Brando's legacy in a positive, tangible way. Number 9. Simon Tehotu. Brando's third biological child, Simon Tehotu Brando, was born in 1963 to Marlon and his third wife, French-Polynesian actress Tarita Teriaipaya. Often referred to simply as Tehotu, he grew up an ocean away from Hollywood, on the islands of Tahiti. Tehotu's upbringing was quite different from his half-brothers in California. After Marlon and Tarita divorced in 1972, Tarita raised Tehotu and his younger sister Cheyenne in Tahiti. In fact, Marlon kept his Tahitian children away from Los Angeles. He once said he wouldn't let Tehotu and Cheyenne come to the U.S. because they are too trusting. They would be destroyed in the pace of life in the States. So, Tehotu led a relatively quiet island life, far removed from his father's celebrity chaos. Tehotu, sometimes called Simon, remained extremely private, just as Marlon wanted. As an adult, he has largely stayed out of the spotlight, earning a reputation as the Brando child, who kept a low profile as per his father's wishes and focused on normal work and family. Reports indicate Tehotu became a hard-working father of 3 himself and still lives in Tahiti, possibly involved in managing the family's island assets and the resort on Tetiaroa. Unlike some of his siblings, Tehotu never saw an acting career or media attention. He was notably absent from Hollywood entirely, except for a tragic moment in 2008 when he quietly flew to Los Angeles to join the family at his half-brother Christian's deathbed. This rare appearance showed his loyalty to family despite the distance. Number 8. Lisa Brando. One of the most surprising tales is that of Lisa Brando, who wasn't publicly known as Marlon's daughter until after the legend's death. Lisa was born in 1964, between the births of Tehotu and Rebecca, to actress Cynthia Lynn, famous for playing Helga on Hogan's Heroes. Cynthia Lynn had a brief affair with Brando in the early 1960s, and for decades the resulting pregnancy was kept quiet. It wasn't until 2004, when Brando passed away, that Cynthia's daughter Lisa stepped forward claiming Marlon Brando was her father. Lisa's quest for recognition is both dramatic and heartbreaking. When Brando died on July 1, 2004, Lisa, then in her late 30s, rushed to the actor's Mulholland Drive home, desperate to be included in the family mourning. She fought with security guards at the gate, pleading, "You have to let me in. I want to be with my brother, Christian." The guards turned her away from the private gathering. To the media camped outside, she insisted, "Brando was my father. I've been trying to meet him since my mother told me 6 years ago." According to Lisa, her mother, Cynthia, revealed the secret around 1998, telling Lisa that she was the product of a fling with Brando on a movie set. In fact, Cynthia and Marlon met working on the 1964 film Bedtime Story, where Cynthia claimed they had sex in his trailer. Lisa's claim added a soap opera twist to the Brando saga. Though she never got to know Marlon personally, she publicly adopted the Brando name and sought to connect with her half-siblings. She expressed a wish to meet her siblings and be acknowledged. However, her paternity was never legally confirmed, and she was not included in Brando's will or estate. Some family members and biographers remain skeptical, and indeed, Brando had never mentioned her. Still, Lisa has continued to identify as Marlon's daughter. She has been active on social media under the name Lisa Brando, sharing memories of her mother and pride in her alleged father's legacy. In interviews, she speaks of carrying Marlon's legacy of excellence, even if her connection was only revealed after his passing. Now around 60 years old, Lisa Brando leads a relatively private life. There's an element of sadness to her story, the what-if of never having had a relationship with the father she believes is hers. Marlon Brando was rumored to have fathered as many as 20 children in total, and Lisa's emergence suggests there may indeed be more untold chapters. Number 7. Rebecca Brando. Rebecca Brando, sometimes known as Rebecca Brando Cotelier, is the youngest child from Marlon's marriage to Movita Castaneda. She was born in 1966, a few years after her brother, Miko. Raised mainly by her mother, Rebecca still spent significant time with her famous dad. Out of all Brando's daughters, Rebecca has been one of the more vocal in sharing fond, and sometimes funny, memories of life with Marlon. One delightful anecdote, she told, reveals the unique challenge of bringing boyfriends home to the Godfather. Imagine a teenage Rebecca introducing a date to her dad, who famously played Vito Corleone. It was intimidating. Rebecca recalls Marlon would playfully scold them with a stern, "No hanky-panky," whenever she and her sisters had boyfriends over, leaving her mortified. Some of her suitors were so terrified that they stopped coming around. They simply couldn't handle Marlon's larger-than-life presence. It's a charming glimpse of Brando as an overprotective, if cheeky, father. Despite Marlon's global fame, Rebecca's own life stayed mostly out of the public eye until adulthood. She did not pursue acting. In fact, Marlon actively discouraged his kids from going into showbiz, calling acting an unrealistic profession. Instead, Rebecca went to college and eventually became a wife and mother, living a grounded life. In recent years, she has taken on the role of family spokesperson of sorts. Rebecca has participated in documentaries and interviews to shed light on her father's true personality beyond the tabloid stories. Notably, she cooperated with the acclaimed 2015 documentary Listen to Me, Marlon, which used Marlon's personal audio tapes to tell his life story. Rebecca said the film was a way for the family to share their perspective. So many books have been written, so many lies told. We were never allowed to speak to the press. This film is our way of doing that. She felt the documentary was like her father coming back to us with a personal diary unlocked for the world. Rebecca has also been involved in preserving Brando's legacy through charitable foundations. For example, supporting her adopted sister, Petra's Brando Fisher Foundation, which helps children in need. Number 6. Cheyenne Brando. Perhaps the most tragic figure among Marlon's children is Tarita Cheyenne Brando, born February 20, 1970. Cheyenne was the daughter of Brando and Tarita Terry Paya, Marlon's third wife from Tahiti. A stunning beauty, Cheyenne had the makings of a star. She started modeling as a teenager, but her life unraveled in a heartbreaking way. She grew up in Tahiti, far from her father, and by her late teens, she felt deeply abandoned by Marlon. In a raw 1990 interview, 20-year-old Cheyenne confessed, "I have come to despise my father for the way he ignored me when I was a child. He came to the island maybe once a year, but really didn't seem to care. He wanted us, but he didn't want us." Those words revealed the pain of a daughter who adored her dad in childhood, only to become estranged. Cheyenne's downward spiral accelerated after a series of misfortunes. In 1989, she severely injured her face in a car accident, crashing her Jeep after Marlon refused to let her visit him on a film set. She suffered a broken jaw, a torn ear, and had to undergo extensive reconstructive surgery in Los Angeles. The crash ended her budding modeling career and plunged her into depression. She began abusing drugs, LSD, tranquilizers, you name it, and her mental health deteriorated. Then came the catastrophic event. In 1990, Cheyenne's boyfriend, Dag Droley, was shot to death by her half-brother Christian during that infamous altercation. Cheyenne was 8 months pregnant at the time. The shock of Dag's death sent Cheyenne over the edge. 1 month later, in June 1990, she gave birth to her son, Tuki Droley. But joy was short-lived. She attempted suicide twice within the first few weeks of motherhood. Distressed and unstable, Cheyenne was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. A French judge deemed her mentally unfit to testify in Christian's trial, which led to Christian's plea deal. Marlon, fearful of what might happen, had quickly sent Cheyenne back to Tahiti after the shooting to remove her from the media glare and legal crossfire. In Tahiti, Cheyenne's mental state only worsened. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, became increasingly paranoid, and even publicly accused her father, Marlon, of horrific things, at one point accusing him of molesting her, which he vehemently denied. Whether these accusations stemmed from her illness or genuine trauma remains unclear, but it further shattered their relationship. By 1995, Cheyenne had lost custody of her son, Tuki. Her mother, Tarita, took over raising him. Isolated and despairing, Cheyenne saw no way out. On April 16, 1995, she died by suicide, hanging herself at her mother's home in Tahiti. She was only 25 years old. Tragically, neither Marlon nor Christian, who was then on probation after prison, attended her funeral in Tahiti, a sign of how fractured things had become. Cheyenne's short life was a torrent of promise and anguish. Her son, Tuki Brando, was just 4 when she died. Raised by his grandmother, Tuki later grew up to become a model and even a medical school graduate, a hopeful continuation of the Brando story. But Cheyenne's fate stands as a grim chapter, the beloved daughter destroyed by the very family legacy she was born into. Number 5. Mimita Brando. Next we have Mimita Brando, born in 1977. Mimita's background is unique. She was not Marlon's biological child, but rather the daughter of Tarita, Cheyenne, and Tehotu's mother from another relationship. Marlon adopted Mimita when she was a young girl. At the time, even though Marlon and Tarita had been divorced for 5 years, he chose to legally bring Tarita's daughter into his family, a gesture that speaks to his ongoing bond with Tarita and her kin. Mimita grew up in Tahiti like her cousins or adoptive siblings, Cheyenne and Tehotu. In fact, Mimete is technically Cheyenne's half-sister via Tareta, but legally became her adoptive sister once Marlon signed the papers. If that sounds confusing, well, Brando's family tree was complicated. As an adoptee, Mimete was part of Brando's extended family, but kept a very low profile. Little is publicly known about her personal life, which likely is by design. Mimete was raised outside the limelight in French Polynesia and appears to have maintained her privacy into adulthood. By all accounts, she did not engage with the Hollywood scene or grant interviews. Now, in her mid-40s, Mimete likely still resides in Tahiti or nearby. One notable and rather sad footnote to Mimete's story is what happened after Marlon's death. Brando pointedly excluded Mimete from his will. Despite having adopted her, he left her and her similarly adopted cousin, Raya Tua, out of any inheritance. Biographers also tend to omit Mimete, suggesting maybe she wasn't closely integrated with Brando's other kids in later years. We don't know if there was a falling out, or simply a belief that she was provided for elsewhere. But imagine being legally someone's child, and then effectively erased from their final wishes. It must have been painful, or at least bewildering, for Mimete. Number 4. Raya Tua Brando. Raya Tua Brando is another of Marlon's Hainai adopted children with ties to Tarita's family. Raya Tua was born in 1982 and is actually Tarita's niece by blood. In a rather extraordinary act, Marlon decided to adopt his ex-wife's niece when the girl was about a toddler. So, Raya Tua is not biologically related to Marlon at all. She is a generational step removed, yet she became his daughter, in name. Why did he adopt her? Some reports suggest Brando was helping out Tarita's extended family, perhaps to give the child better opportunities, or simply out of affection for Tarita. Raya Tua, like Mimete, grew up in Tahiti, far from the paparazzi. Being a child in the 1980s in a tropical paradise, she would have been shielded from the Hollywood chaos happening in L.A., like Christian's trial or Brando's career, ups and downs. In essence, Raya Tua enjoyed a normal upbringing in her Polynesian community. She too has kept out of the public eye entirely. Now, in her early 40s, she remains an enigma to the media, likely intentionally so. Unfortunately, Raya Tua experienced the same posthumous snub as Mimete. She was excluded from Marlon's will in 2004. In fact, both adopted Tahitian girls were left out. And, as one article noted, neither are mentioned in any of the stars' biographies. That implies that even some Brando historians overlooked them, perhaps considering them more informal adoptees. Legally, though, they were his children. We don't know how Raya Tua felt about this exclusion. She has never spoken about it publicly. Possibly having not been raised by Marlon directly, Tarita likely raised her. She may not have expected an inheritance. 3. Nina Priscilla Brando. In the late 1980s, Marlon Brando's life took yet another turn, this time a domestic one. He became involved with his longtime Guatemalan housekeeper, Maria Cristina Ruiz, and together they had 3 children. The eldest of these is Nina Priscilla Brando, born in 1989. Nina's arrival marked a new chapter. Brando was 65 years old when she was born, a veteran actor by then, and yet starting another family. Her mother, Maria, was originally the family maid who became Marlon's companion for over a decade. By all accounts, they lived together as a couple, though never married, and raised their kids at Brando's Los Angeles compound. Growing up as Marlon's daughter in the 90s, Nina had a very different childhood from, say, Christian or Cheyenne. For one, Marlon was older, semi-retired, and more reclusive by then. He wasn't making big films. He was more of an eccentric homebody. In some ways, Nina and her younger brothers had a more stable home life with Marlon than his earlier kids did. There were no custody battles since they lived with Dad, and Brando's wild Hollywood days had calmed. Photos from the time are scarce, as Brando fiercely guarded their privacy. But one imagines a young girl growing up in the mansion of an aging legend, perhaps doted on by a father determined to do things right this time. However, trouble brewed when Marlon and Maria Ruiz's relationship soured around 2001. Maria claimed that Brando had promised to take care of her and the children for life. After they split, she filed a bombshell $100 million lawsuit against him in 2002, essentially a palimony suit, alleging he broke his promise of support. The suit revealed to the public the existence of Nina and her brothers, who were then 13, 10, and 8, and aired the family's dirty laundry. Maria said she and Marlon had been together since 1988, that he had lived together with her and the kids as a family unit. This must have been a confusing and tense time for young Nina, who was about 13, old enough to sense the conflict. The case was eventually settled out of court. Brando reportedly agreed to a settlement in 2003, avoiding a trial, ensuring financial provision for Maria, Nina, and her brothers. After Brando's death in 2004, Nina, just 15, largely vanished from public view. She presumably continued her education and life with her mother. Now, in her mid-30s, Nina has maintained privacy. We haven't seen tell-all books or interviews from her. It seems she chose anonymity over any spotlight. As an adult, she likely benefited from her father's estate. Brando's will did include his remaining children in the inheritance split. 2. Miles Jonathan Brando. Born in 1992, is the middle child of Marlon Brando and Maria Cristina Ruiz, the housekeeper-turned-partner. He was Marlon's 9th child, arriving when Brando was about 68 years old, a grandfather many times over, yet changing diapers again. Miles was only a toddler when his family life got complicated by his parents' split and legal disputes. At roughly 10 years old, he became part of that headline-making lawsuit his mother filed in 2002, which described him and his siblings as living with Marlon and depended on his support. For the most part, Miles grew up in the relative seclusion of Brando's estate in the Hollywood Hills. By the time he was old enough to form memories, Marlon was no longer the dashing leading man on set, but rather a reclusive elder statesman of acting, doing occasional projects like The Island of Dr. Moreau or giving interviews from home. It's likely that Miles' childhood memories of his dad are of a larger-than-life storyteller at home. Perhaps Marlon regaling the kids with tales, watching movies together, or engaging in his intellectual hobbies. Brando was known to be eccentric, but doting with his young children in his later years. One can imagine Miles had an upbringing where Marlon Brando was just dad, albeit a dad who might show you The Godfather one night and take phone calls from Michael Jackson the next. Miles was 12 when Brando passed away in 2004. In the aftermath, thanks to the arrangements from the lawsuit settlement and Brando's will, Miles and his siblings were provided for. The estate, which included Brando's Tahitian ad-hole and other assets, was divided among the children, though with so many descendants, no one got a massive fortune. Thereafter, Miles receded entirely from the public eye. He didn't become a child actor or do interviews. Much like his sister Nina, Miles has kept his life private and out of tabloids. Number 1. Timothy Guihan Brando. The youngest of Marlon Brando's known children was born in 1994 to Marlon and Maria Cristina Ruiz. Being the baby of the family, Marlon was 70 by the time Tim came along. Timothy had the shortest time with his father, only about 10 years before Brando's passing. Timothy's early years were spent in that same household with his siblings, Nina and Miles. Enjoying what one might imagine was a rather indulgent environment, Marlon, in his old age, was said to let his young kids have the run of the place, and he doted on them. Timothy was just a decade old when he lost his father, which undoubtedly was a tough event for a little boy. But by then, His mother Maria and older siblings were a strong support system. Like his brother and sister, Timothy grew up entirely outside the public spotlight. No child star business, no scandals with his name in it. If anything, his name popped up only in the context of estate discussions, since he too was an heir to Brando's assets. One interesting tidbit. Because Timothy was so young, his mother Maria fought to ensure he and his siblings were financially secure after Brando's death. Remember that lawsuit? The settlement likely included provisions for trust funds or financial support into adulthood. Additionally, when Brando's will was executed, Timothy was among the remaining children who inherited a share of his father's estate. While the estate's value was not astronomical given Brando's high spending and the split between many heirs, it presumably gave Timothy a cushion in life. Now, in his early 30s, Timothy Guihan Brando has remained completely under the radar. He's arguably the most normal Brando, simply because the public knows next to nothing about him, which is exactly how a normal person's life is.